Right now, Enshrouded is my favorite open world survival RPG available, largely because it just has everything you want from a game like this. A massive open world that features several distinct biomes, a ton of bosses and different enemy types, a full-fledged skills system with a ton of quests to complete to unlock new craftables for your character, as well as one of the most powerful building systems in gaming right now. This building system is voxel-based, so you can literally just mine through everything. Like, oh yeah, is that mountain hard to get up? Just mine your way through it and create your own path. You can actually do that in this game. Or head home and build a full-fledged and massive base with basically every material in the game. And the game has full-fledged multiplayer, so you don't have to do any of this alone if you don't want to. Yeah, Enshrouded's a pretty special one, and a big part of what is making this game so undeniably great is it just keeps getting better. Enshrouded literally just got a massive patch 4 update that is totally free and adds in a ton of new content to experience. This is easily the largest update the game has gotten thus far, and I was already looking forward to this one, but then the devs reached out to sponsor this video, and honestly, this was one of the easiest sponsors I've ever said yes to because Enshrouded is amazing. The new update will almost immediately suck you in. The real core of this new update is going to be the new region in the northeast of the map. It's aptly named the Albaneve Summits, as you could probably imagine, and while it is one big new region, it's really made up of 2 distinct biomes, and each of these will have their own gameplay effects. One half of this is going to be the overgrown forested mountains. Here, you're going to find the new conifer trees, whose logs will be imperative in some of the new crafting recipes. One of the big themes you'll notice here is a lot of the new stuff added with this will hook into some of the older systems with the game, and generally, this will be a more heavily wooded area that features several new types of animals like yaks. And remember those because some of the creature mechanics were heavily expanded with this update, but one of the other cool new features of this area is updrafts. To make navigating through these giant mountains a bit easier, you can now occasionally hit updrafts on your glider. This will force you upwards and allow you to continue flying for even longer. And some of the puzzles in this section will actually make use of this, so you'll have to navigate the updrafts to get to certain areas. And the gliding system and Enshrouded just generally got an overhaul with this update, so wind can now move you off course a lot more and flying around becomes a bit more dynamic. But on the other side, you're also going to have the more overtly snow-covered areas. Sometimes this will be mountain peaks, and other times it'll just be the northern parts of the map that'll feature snow for the first time in Enshrouded. And this snow really matters. Not only will this slow you down physically as you try and walk through the newly added deep snow, but Enshrouded also has a hypothermia mechanic. It's very similar to the Shroud, where basically hypothermia will eventually begin to impact you if you spend too long in some of these coldest of environments. But of course, you can offset hypothermia with new warm items, whether that just be a torch you're carrying around or a whole suite of new armors you can wear. So this too begins to add to that organic gameplay loop. You try and work your way north or up on top of some of these mountains, you hit the snow, start getting threatened by hypothermia, and then you'll have to do some quests in this new region to find more temperature protective clothing that does have that desired frost resistance, or maybe even just utilize some of the newly spawned resources to craft better gear for yourself. And even ice is a thing now, so sometimes you'll hit patches of ice that'll just make you instantly slide and really have to reevaluate how you're approaching a situation. So even before we talk about some of the new things to do and find in this new region, it's pretty fun. It has several new gameplay mechanics associated with it, and just in general, there is a lot of new content here. And if all of that somehow wasn't enough, this update also adds in dynamic weather to Enshrouded. It'll now rain or snow, which can lead to further debuffs to your character. And based off this description, you can probably start to see the organic way this new region sucks you in. You'll of course want to explore it, but to do so, you'll have to invest in collecting some of these new resources and questing in the new area. And there is quite a bit to find here. There's a wide array of not only new passive animals, but also a ton of new enemies were added with this. There's going to be a new group of flame-based enemies here. They're going to utilize things like flamethrowers, flaming weapons, and more. This will keep them warm because, of course, they live in this frosty section of the map. They need to stay warm somehow. But the new enemies will also drop new things. So you might take out one of the tougher of these and notice, oh hey, now I have some new items that will increase my frost resistance, including new food items that can help increase this. But there's also a wide array of flame and frost themed weapons and armors added with this update that you can get from these new enemies and taking them down. But on the total flip side, there's also going to be some new ice-based enemies as well. There's going to be these flying frost creatures perched all over. You'll find quite a few of their nests in the new region, as well as a new boss fight that is crawling with a ton of new enemies all around it. With patch 4 overall, the skill tree was updated, so there's now actually grappling hook skills that you can utilize in combat. So yeah, these new frost flying enemies are annoying, but as soon as you could just grappling hook them right next to you, it becomes a lot easier and honestly a lot more fun. So as you dive into this update, there is a lot to unpack. You'll probably spend many of your initial hours just exploring around, finding a ton of the new stuff. But as much as patch 4 is an exploration update with a giant new region to explore, there's also a huge component of just sitting around at home. With update 4, there's more reason than ever to just sit around at your base and just generally to build a cool base, because now you'll actually have some guests here. The crafting NPCs in Enshrouded were reworked to be more like living things. Before, these NPCs would basically just be placed down and then stand in place. You could talk to them and interact with them doing some of their quests, but otherwise they wouldn't do much. Now, with the new version of the game, these NPCs will want to be assigned a bed and shelter. You'll assign a bed to them, and what kind of shelter is built around their bed will actually determine their happiness, and they can be unhappy. Even further, the crafting NPCs can now actually move around. You'll be able to set a radius for how far they can move, but it'll feel like they're living in the structures they're in. Which, yeah, for a lot of you, this might sound relatively minor, but if you've played Enshrouded for a while now, this will feel crazy. Seeing the blacksmith finally walking around and talking to you is a pretty big deal. And beyond that, many of the crafting systems themselves were updated. There are totally new craftables added by this update, and even some new crafting tables and crafting trees implemented. Because one of the other major features is a new taming mechanic, which is a ton of fun. Following this update, you'll immediately get several quests around taming animals or even pets for yourself. Because yes, pets are now a thing. You can rescue cats and dogs. Yeah, I personally opted for the dog quest first. That probably says something about me. And while I am just showing you one breed here, there are several breeds of dogs added with this one. It's one of those things where this doesn't really do anything different. I just have a dog hanging around my house. I could build a bed as well as some food and a food bowl for them. But at the same time, being able to walk around my house, go through crafting some things or waiting on something to finish, and having a dog wandering around, laying down, and that I can pet really does add a lot to the experience, even though technically it's not really adding that much. If you're looking for something a bit more practical when it comes to new creatures, there's also going to be passive animals in the world that you can tame. Many of these will be from the old regions you've already explored, but there's also going to be some new ones from the new region. The taming process is pretty simple. Basically just build a bait of a certain kind, throw it in front of the pet a few times without startling them, and eventually they'll come to love you and you could take them home to your base. From there, you'll have to build them their own enclosure, place down food as well as a food bowl, and even each animal needs their own bed. But once those animals are happy and at home, they can not only breed, but also produce some kind of new resources for you. And when it comes to some of the new animals added in, this is going to be how you get some of the top tier new items from this update. Like with these yaks, who are now producing wool for me, but I need to refine that wool with a new crafting table, and there is an entire new quest line at the tailor to get some of these warmer clothes. And you can start to see how 20 minutes in the new area could turn into hours of additional gameplay. You hit that deep snow, start coming up against the hypothermia threat, and then you realize, oh, I need better gear, and that will lead you down a fairly extensive path. You'll be catching yaks, building a home for them at your base, and then doing additional quests for the tailor, finally getting back into the cold at the end of all of that. But while you are out exploring the Albaneve Summits, it's not just animals you'll find. Your base really does come much more alive with this update because there are also new villagers here as well. These aren't going to be new crafting NPCs, but really just general NPCs that were surviving out in the wilderness. You can now rescue their soul and bring it back to your base to be placed down, and they'll have many of those same requirements. Wanting a bed as well as a nice shelter, and sometimes they'll even tell you about some of their friends that were also stranded out in the wilderness, leading you on completely new quests to rescue more people and actually bring that family back together. Between the new taming as well as some of these new villagers and even the crafting NPCs wandering around, this makes a really big difference for your base. Because now your base actually feels alive. You have several people living there, moving around, and not only will this make you want to build up a nicer base, but you can also take advantage of some of the newly added crafting materials to make that cool base. And there really is a ton more beyond all of this. This biome is just teeming with new content, and many game systems were updated to adapt to this. The level cap with this update was upped to 35. There are new flame levels that require some of the items from these new regions, and a ton more. Because if you haven't been paying attention to Enshrouded, now is definitely the time to jump in. This most recent update is of course massive, but there's been several other large-scale updates to ship for this game over the past year or so, including one that brought in custom difficulty modes, so you could really customize the difficulty to be whatever you want it to be. You can configure Enshrouded to be a hardcore survival game, or something a lot more passive where building is the focus. So if you've been sleeping on Enshrouded, now is definitely the time to stop. Use my link below to pick up Enshrouded for yourself and check out the new update, but also all the other wonderful content that's shipping with Enshrouded, because yes, this game has a very active player base, has been getting a ton of content as of late, and it really just is one of the best open world survival RPGs that you can play right now.